Once Trump takes office January 20th, one of his first acts may be to pardon the hundreds of January 6 criminal defendants who have been convicted of crimes in connection with the attack on the Capitol. He's already said publicly he would pardon many of them, and at least 10 defendants have actually asked their judge to postpone criminal proceedings because they believe they may receive a pardon once he takes office. Now, most of those have been denied, but this week, Trump appointee Judge Carl Nichols granted Edward Jacob Lang's request to postpone his trial. Nichols agreed to the postponement, but said in open court that anything approaching wholesale pardons would be beyond frustrating and disappointing, according to the Washington Post. But if Trump decides to pardon all of the federal January 6 defendants, he's going to have the power to do it in one fell swoop.
The pardon power is unlimited. So let's imagine a different president decides, I'm going to pardon everybody who's engaged in inside trading against federal law who's over 6 feet. Utterly arbitrary. They can do it.
The federal government continues to expend an extraordinary amount of resources prosecuting what FBI Director Chris Wray calls domestic terrorism. This week alone, in D.C. federal court, there were multiple trials, conferences, hearings, and sentencing, all for January 6 defendants.
Recent weeks, 2 criminal cases against President-elect Donald Trump have been dismissed by virtue of the fact that he will soon reassume the presidency. And on Sunday, during an interview on Meet the Press, he said that Capitol rioters, quote, had no other choice when it came to assaulting police officers. Certainly something of interest for my guest tonight, former Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn, up late with me tonight here on the Final Five. Always good to see you, Harry. Thanks for joining us.
Jim, glad to be with you, my friend.
Last time we talked with you was before the election. You were really active in trying to elect people to Congress as part of your Dunn's Democracy Defenders Political Action Committee. We're here in the aftermath, on the precipice of a new Congress, on the precipice of Donald Trump retaking the presidency. What's your read on the situation so far?
It's unfortunate, man, and I think it's a lot of people are realizing, with his words on Sunday that you just referenced with Meet the Press, the things that he said, his nominations to his cabinet. People are slowly realizing what's real, what's happening. It's happening, and I feel like that's why I did all the work that I did during the election season, because I saw the writing was on the wall. He said what he was going to do, and now that he's doing it, I mean, I got calls from former officers saying, wait, is he really going to pardon these people? Yes, he said he was going to do it. So why do we not believe him? And that's why I was campaigning so hard to elect Vice President Harris.
So you say people are realizing that at this point, and I know that people like you, you said as much before the election that this was something that was very important for you. People on election night were polled and said democracy was a top concern out there. But when the votes were counted, clearly Donald Trump won the popular vote. He won the electoral vote. He is the duly elected president-elect of the United States. But there's also those concerns that you bring up that are still out there.
Well, you also got to realize, 20 million less people voted this year. So a lot of people may have said democracy was important, but a lot of people also stayed home. We have to acknowledge that, and that's frankly disappointing. But yeah, democracy, we just have to sit back and wait. Donald Trump has already told us what he's going to do, and who knows what he's going to do. He's very impulsive. We've seen that in the past with the way he governed before. And now, it's kind of like this is his last term. Well, we hope so. Who knows? He's floated the idea of him saying, why do we just have to have 2 terms? He's floated that idea before. So, I guess everything is on the table, and we just need to sit back and see how things are going to play out. And that's why it's so important for people to be educated prior to the elections, because now all this stuff is slowly coming to fruition.
In the last 4 years, I have been very careful to say on this show and on our newscasts that if you were on the ellipse on January 6, 2021, you were exercising your First Amendment right. You have a right to disagree with what happened in the election. But if you were down at the Capitol and if you were busting down the doors and if you were assaulting police officers out there, that's a whole different story. Look, Harry, you work in law enforcement. If that's the standard now, who else gets off?
Yeah, so, being a Capitol Police officer for over 15 years, we saw all kinds of First Amendment demonstrations, even things that we disagree with, but people had the right to do it. It wasn't even about the message. they were allowed to protest. And that's what it was all about. On January 6th, once you crossed onto Capitol ground, the grounds were closed. So at a very minimum, you're guilty of trespassing. And then not to talk about all the people that entered the Capitol, that stormed and attacked police officers, that violently assaulted police officers, that vandalized the Capitol. That's a whole different level of things right now. But when you're going into talking about the pardoning, it kind of just lets it say, hey, it was okay to do so. Not that you weren't guilty of doing it, but hey, I'm forgiving you for doing it, and it's okay. And that's what's the most unfortunate part about it.
For Jack Smith to withdraw the case here in D.C. and the sentencing in the New York case pushed off for some time. There's still a case in Georgia that's on hold. But a lot of people said the Trump defense was to delay. He did indeed. And at that point, you got past the election day when really we're in this territory where we've never been before. So for Donald Trump to take that oath of office on January 20th, knowing what has played out in the courts, what does that say about the legal system?
It needs improvement. And a lot of people have been calling for criminal justice reform for a long time. You know, I'm all on the side of reforming criminal justice, but 4 years, it'd be 4 years, you know, since now on January 20th when he takes the oath of office again. But it took over 2.5 years, 3 years to decide if he could face charges, let alone face the charges. So we have to do something. I mean, this justice system is moving way too slow, and people that deserve justice have been waiting for a very long time. You know, a speedy trial does not only apply to the defendant, it applies to society too. And that's very problematic. And that's why it's so important to get involved in these elections. Donald Trump, I believe, picked a Supreme Court that would grant him the type of immunity that he got.
Harry Dunn joining us here on the Final Five. Harry, always appreciate it. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Jim. Take care, my friend.
We were 4 years ago in the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election. Court challenges left and right. A candidate who refused to concede the election, and to be fair, still refused to concede the election to this day. But what a difference 4 years makes. My guest tonight has been on the show before. He is the author of the book Disproven. His name is Ken Block, and he's up late with me tonight here on the Final Five. Ken, good to see you again.
Jim, nice to see you.
All right, so let's just let people know who may not have seen you the last time on the show. You worked with the Trump 2020 campaign when there were these allegations of voter fraud, and as the book suggests, you didn't find any.
Right. I was brought in to do the legal due diligence, the data part of the legal due diligence. The Trump campaign attorneys that I reported to asked me to not only look for evidence of voter fraud that could have changed an election result, but they pushed about 20 different claims of fraud that other people had made to me, and they asked me to weigh in and take the role of the opposing team's expert in court to determine if the claims held up or not, and none of them did.
So as you look at, from your vantage point, what we've seen, I mean, you were not working intimately with the campaign or at all with the campaign this time around. As you watched it and saw how quickly on election night it was a decisive victory for President-elect Trump, did it strike you just the difference in his stance 4 years ago versus this year?
Yeah, I mean, President Trump made it very clear that if he lost, it was only because it could only have been possible because of fraud. He won, so there were no claims of fraud. You know, fraud doesn't typically work that way. There's either fraud and you can prove it and show it, or there's not. It was a decisive win. The Electoral College went heavily to the president this time around. And as I've been playing with some of the results recently, it's very interesting. In the swing states, in 2020, the Libertarian presidential candidate took a lot of votes. In some cases, like in Georgia and Arizona, 5 times as many votes as Trump lost that state by. And in Pennsylvania, as many votes went to the Libertarian as Trump lost that state by. This time, the Libertarian votes melted away. If you remember, President Trump went to the Libertarian convention, promised them he'd get rid of the Department of Education. He brought RFK on board, which is appealing to a lot of libertarians. And the net result is between the libertarian votes that weren't there this time, and I know they voted for Trump this time, and the Green Party, which was on only one of the swing state ballots in 2020, but in 2024, they were only not on one swing state. They took 100,000 votes, and the libertarians lost 200,000 votes Add those up, and that eliminates Biden's margin of victory in the swing states in 2020. It was really quite impressive, and there's a lot of strategy involved to have made that all work out.
Okay, so I want to ask you this. We've heard from Kash Patel, who is his FBI director nominee, who has talked about wanting to go after people who in the media, among others, who, quote, helped Biden rig the election in 2020. As we've indicated, it was not rigged. Do we think that we're going to go down that path, relitigating 2020, even though President-elect Trump won a decisive victory a couple of weeks ago?
So I hope we don't. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is, after 4 years of intense scrutiny, nobody has surfaced any evidence of actionable voter fraud. Enough fraud to have changed an election result, enough fraud that you can prove harmed the president's campaign. It isn't there, and this won't be fruitful. That political capital, the political capital to do something about elections, should be targeted on how can we improve things. There's a golden opportunity for Republicans, when they control both chambers of Congress, to do some really productive work. So, for example, I can provide lists of hundreds and hundreds of people who voted twice in 2022, and soon enough we'll be able to do the same thing in 2024. There are literally millions of voters on the voter rolls who carry registrations in multiple states. This has nothing to do with fraud. Right. It has to do with the silly way we conduct our elections, and each state maintains its own voter rolls, and it's very hard for states to track when somebody moves and get rid of it. There are a lot of smart things we can do to fix those problems, and I would strongly encourage the Trump campaign to focus their energies on making those changes. Let's get some compromise and consensus, and let's improve our elections across the board, because the way we do it now is the way we did it roughly 200 years ago, and it just doesn't make any sense now.
You had me smiling there, because at one point when I lived in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. within a 5-year span, and I realized I was still technically on the voter rolls in all 3 jurisdictions, although you only vote in one place.
That's right.
By the way, Ken lays a lot of this out in his book. Again, the book is called Disproven. Ken, good to see you again.